Textures take on many different forms, and each one depicts the article that it's covering. So I'm going to go in here and zoom in on another little tidbit right there, and we have this really weird animal skin right there. All kinds of weird stuff happening to it. So let's recreate that kind of an effect. Now keep in mind that I'm doing a particular thing here, but a little variation in what I'm doing, a little variation in colors and so on, or a setting of a filter can have a dramatically different effect on your final outcome. So I totally encourage you to experiment, not take what I've done literally and just go in there and start experimenting on your own and find a whole bunch of happy accidents that will give you a lot of solutions to problems you'll be faced with. So let's go in here and I'm going to create a layer right here on top, and I'm going to fill it with a color. This will be a nice kind of a brownish color like that. And I'll just go ahead and fill it. Foreground color right there. I'm going to give it texturizer. I use that filter a lot because it's a good basis for a lot of things. I'm going to bring the scaling up, and I'm going to bring the relief up a bit. Then we have all that nappy stuff in the foreground. Well, let's create that effect. It's going to be a little tougher. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to just fill this new layer with a neutral density, a nice 50% gray. I'm going to give it noise. I'm going to give it a lot of noise. Now, I want to introduce a lot of gray to this so I can get some nice even tones for my next filter. So before that, I'm going to filter it with a little blur more, which is going to introduce some grays. Now comes my next filter, which is on the pixelate. I'm going to do crystallize. Crystallize is going to create these big chunks. They're going to be small, but I want some fairly big chunks about like that. Click OK, and I have these big chunks all over the place. To those, I'm going to apply yet another filter. I'm going to say find the edges of all those chunks. And there we see that we have all these nice little tones happening all through there. So I'm going to blur it just a little bit. A little Gaussian blur just to soften them. And then I'm going to go into my levels where I'm going to strengthen them. So now I'm getting these much thicker lines like that. So now that I have that, I'm going to go in there and apply yet another filter. I'm going to go into brush strokes here and apply spatter. And spatter is going to go in here and start to really roughen those up. I can bring the smoothness up a little bit, maybe the spray radius down, so they're not so chaotic. And I got these nice tones happening there. Click OK, and I got this happening. Which I'm going to go into my levels once again and just take those gray tones and just make them a little darker, like that. So now that I have that, I'm going to go in there and say, I want to make that into a different mode. I'll put it into multiply mode. So now I have all these dark tones on top of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer. So I have another one right on top there. This one I'm going to blur it even more. A Gaussian blur. Just start to kind of spread out those tones right there like that. Soften that up. And I'm going to go in there and increase those dark tones. So I start getting these really heavy dark tones in between there. Click OK. And this one I'll just bring down the opacity just a little to just get those other tones to come through from underneath right there like that. So now I can go in here and start playing around with that basic brown texture underneath where I can start adding a little tonality to it, a little bending here and there. And so I'm just going to go in there and let's set this to our shadows so we can get some nice warm tones of the fur. And there we can see that we're getting a nice texture going through there. And I might want to go in there and do some very specific little areas where I want to go in there and just add little tones right into these little spots right in there, very lightly, to give them a little dimensional look to them. And there we can see that we're adding all these nice little textures to certain spots and making this look like this burly kind of animal skin like the one we see in the Times Square scene.